Hello, it's me again. So I wanted to make a video today about a few things that have come up in client sessions repeatedly, and I shared about it on my Facebook page and people seem to really appreciate these distinctions. So I thought I would make a video for those who prefer to get content this way. So the first distinction I want to share is about these terms we hear a lot these days in dating and messy breakups, such as ghosting or breadcrumbing. The other day, a couple of my clients, totally separate, used these terms in our session to describe how the other person they were talking about was behaving. And I don't do this very often in client sessions or in life in general. I interrupted them immediately. When we try to quantify another person's behavior, when we're not actually communicating with them, we're trying to understand what's going on, right? But the problem is, if we're not communicating with them, we don't actually know. The problem with this kind of quantifying someone else's behavior is that we're subtly wrong making. We're making how they're behaving or how they're treating us wrong. And because we can't actually communicate in that moment, for whatever reason they're not communicating or they're not showing up in a way that works for you, it actually keeps us locked in our head, overthinking, overanalyzing maybe their motives, why they're behaving that way, why they would be treating you this way, how hurt you feel, all of these kind of things. Reality is, we don't actually know why someone is behaving that way or why someone isn't connecting with you because we can't communicate with them in those moments. And this not knowing is incredibly frustrating for most people. It's really, really hard because our mind naturally gravitates towards wanting certainty. Our mind craves black and white thinking. It's like either or, this is the certain way that we can go in life, like how we navigate through the world. But that's not conducive when we can't have communication with somebody. So if we don't know why the other person is behaving the way that they are, we can assume some potentials. Perhaps they don't have the language to communicate what's going on with them in that moment. They might be at the developmental age of like a 2 or 3-year-old when it comes to hard conversations and difficult communication. Their nervous system might be in flight or freeze. And when any of our nervous systems get into that fight, flight, or freeze, we don't have control anymore. We don't have that agency that we would if we weren't in a heightened stress response state. They also might have a million other scenarios that take precedent and priority over their own survival at that time in their life. You don't really know. The point with all of this is that it's not about them. If someone isn't showing up in a way that nourishes you, let them go. I know it's easier said than done, but that's what needs to actually be done in these moments. Not trying to figure out their why, not trying to figure out why they treat you so poorly, why they've disappeared. It doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with them. And also noticing that when you behave the same way, or your actions or non-actions could be interpreted the same way by other people, because absolutely that has happened at some point. Because we don't always know how to communicate what we need to communicate with someone. We don't always want to. We don't always desire to have that connection, or a million other things again. So noticing also that the humanity on both sides. When we do let someone go who's not showing up, then we get to deal with what's actually present for you. And that's the actual work that gets to be done. Okay, so the next point that I want to share about is the differences between what we might call extroversion and introversion, or assertiveness, passiveness, fight or freeze mode, things like that, where there's like this obvious polarity on a spectrum between an extreme. So like an extreme extrovert versus an extreme introvert. I'll share from my perspective, and I've had this come up in client sessions as well, and I find this to be so helpful. So I have always been quite introverted. It's my natural state. I tend to withdraw really easy. I love my bubble. I love being in my own space. I love my own company. Well, that wasn't always the case, but I do now. And I am very in my own world a lot of the time. And it's taken a lot of work for me to come out of that shell. And my go-to stress response generally is freeze. And then freeze can go on the tendency of fawn, which is like people pleasing. When people have this tendency to freeze more, or to be introverted, or to be withdrawn more, we have a harder time expressing what is going on inside of us right in the moment. We have a harder time knowing right away what we're feeling, what we're sensing, what we're thinking. And it can often take us time to understand what's going on inside of us. And I used to think something was wrong with me. I used to think that this was not okay, that I should know right away, always, what I think, what I feel. And I would often be attracted to either romantic relationships, friendships, dynamics where the other person was much more extroverted, right? Opposites attract, it's quite normal. And they would have frustration on their side because they know like what they feel right away, what they're thinking right away. They would say it right, right out. And this would always leave me feeling really, really frustrated because I just didn't know. And then it would kind of push me more into freeze mode and more withdrawn. And that would frustrate them more because they're trying to connect with me more and I can't even connect with myself in that moment. So this is a really common dynamic in relationships. And I think it can be mislabeled a lot of the time as dysfunctional. And sometimes it does tend on dysfunctional, right? It's not healthy when it gets to kind of an extreme. But it's also quite normal. And part of the issue here is that both sides have something to bring to the table. So for example, for me, I have always been told by people close to me that I have a calming influence, that I help them feel relaxed, that they can just be themselves, we can slow down, these kind of qualities. Whereas a more extroverted person is going to feel, they might not necessarily like it all the time, but they might feel more compelled to be more out in the world, more confrontational, more spontaneous, pushing comfort zones, debating, arguing. And neither of those are better or worse. We need both. We need both, right? But when we don't take the time to understand the other person's perspective and the other person's very different experience, we actually cause further disconnect. So in this kind of dynamic, if you have this happening in your romantic relationship, in your friendships, in a work relationship, anywhere in your life, in the family dynamics, the practice for the extrovert or the more aggressive, assertive person, or the one whose tendency is to go into fight mode more, the task for that person is to practice listening. Not listening to respond, just listening. And that's going to be a challenge for that type of person. The challenge, the task for the more introverted, the more withdrawn, the person who tends to freeze more, is to practice expressing what's going on inside, as messy as that is, and perfectly as that is. On both sides, we need curiosity and we need genuine desire to seek to understand one another, even if there's a big discrepancy in how I experience things versus how someone else experiences things. It's really important to at least have that desire to try to understand. We may not actually understand, but we can try. Okay, so this third distinction that I want to share is about when we label people or behavior as toxic. Toxic by definition is something that causes severe injury or death. Generally speaking, when I've heard most people call someone toxic, call themselves toxic, another person toxic, or someone's behavior toxic, we are actually subtly dehumanizing that person. We're subtly wrong-making who they are, what they're doing, and assuming that that person has malicious intent behind what they're doing or not doing. Rarely is the toxic behavior actually toxic, but it might be triggering to you. It might be immature. Newsflash, we all have immature moments. It might be undesirable, non-ideal. It might be incredibly frustrating and annoying. It might be a lot of things, but it's rarely actually toxic. So much of the behavior that I actually see that we label as toxic is someone just trying to get their needs met the best way that they know how. And that often is in an immature way. So for example, this could be like a part within us that's maybe only 5 years old in a 40-year-old body. If that 5-year-old part is trying to make a connection with someone or get their needs met somehow, but they don't have the language, they don't have the self-awareness as a 5-year-old to get those needs met in a 40-year-old way, it's going to come off as underdeveloped or immature, annoying, right? But we're not going to see it as that because we're going to see the person as the adult body that they're in. But we all have these parts within us that are underdeveloped. Unless someone is blatantly, overtly causing harm, we can't really call it toxic. This other nuance to this is that harm is caused all the time. We all cause harm. Harm is facilitated constantly, even in the small moments. When we don't mean to, we try our best not to hurt people, hurt ourselves, but it still happens. We have to make choices in life that either disregard or disappoint ourselves or disappoint or disregard others. We eat animals, we eat plants, we squish bugs, we pick that slug off the zucchini that it was enjoying so we can eat it ourselves. We make plans that don't involve certain people that would really love to be there, or we befriend someone that you know is going to ruffle someone else's feathers. We change directions in life and lose a beloved part of ourselves. Children move out of the house when they grow up and that leave their parents' hearts aching. That doesn't mean any of this is wrong. We do not get to live this life and not feel hurt. Being human, being alive is messy, it's imperfect, and it's beautiful. Even the ugly parts. What we can do is do our best to be conscious of our actions and the repercussions and the consequences of our actions, and not to jump to conclusions about why someone else is behaving the way that they are. And we get to have grace when we inevitably hurt someone else or ourselves, because it is part of being human and it's part of being alive. And it's not the totality of being alive. I hope you found these distinctions helpful. If you did, please comment and like below. Please subscribe. I'm not sure where that is. I'm still learning, but subscribe, please. And if you have any questions, comment below. And if you have any requests on content for me to talk about.